In this lesson, we are going to be looking at how to simplify complex fractions. Kevin, what is a complex fraction? Good question. So you get like normal fractions, right? Where you've got like, I don't know, x over y. That's a normal fraction. Now, if I make either this one into a fraction, so maybe I say something like x over z, now it is a complex fraction. Or I maybe decide to make the bottom one a fraction. Now we have a complex fraction, or I can decide to make both of them a fraction on top of a fraction, and that is a complex fraction. So a complex fraction has a fraction within a fraction, and that could either be at the top, at the bottom, or both. Make sense? Now let me show you how to actually solve these things, or how to simplify them. So there we have a complex fraction. So what you need to be really good at identifying is where is the main fraction line. So that would be this one. It's the longest line over there. That's the main fraction line, okay? So what you're going to do now is you are going to write the top fraction. You are then going to take the... So we know that this means divide. So you could think of it like this. Okay? It's the same thing. Now, you know from previous lessons that if you have a fraction divided by a fraction, then what we do is we use the KCF method. Keep, change, flip. So we keep the first fraction exactly as it is. We change the sign from divide to multiply, and we flip this fraction upside down, and now we just use normal multiplication. So the way that would work is you can multiply top times top, which is going to be 18, bottom times bottom, which would become, keep it in brackets for now, because that's what we always like to do with our denominators, because now we can also simplify. So if you type in 18 over 4 on your calculator, it gives you 9 over 2. So you can simplify this to 9 over 2, and then we typically leave the bottom in the factorized form. Or your teacher might be like, please multiply it out. So then you can multiply it out, for example. It doesn't really matter. You just stick with what your teacher wants to do. But what I'm showing you here is the bigger picture of like how to get to that final part. Okay, let's try another example. So here's our next one. So here you can see the main fraction line is over there. So what I would do is I'll go write out the first fraction. Then I know that that means divide 25 over x squared. And then we know that when you have a divide between two fractions, you can actually just turn it into a multiply, and then you flip this one upside down. Now check this out. Remember a few lessons ago we were doing multiplication and division of rational fractions or something like that. And what we then, it just looked a little bit different then because we put like a little dot over here, and then we had x squared over 25. And then what would happen is, if anything was the same at the top and the bottom, then we could cancel. So for example, this and this can cancel. You may be thinking, Kevin, don't we need to get a common denominator? Now, that's only if we are using plus and minus in between, okay? But when you're multiplying, you don't do common denominators. Okay, so the final answer is just going to be x plus 2 at the top and 25 at the bottom. Ooh, this is a good one. So what I like about this one is that this bottom part is not one term, it's two terms. So there's going to be something we have to do there. So my advice is the following. Because in all of the examples I've showed you in the previous, in this video, the previous examples, for example, with this one, it was one term. See, that's one big term, and that's one term. The same is true for this one. There's one term, and there's one term. But now for the first time, at the bottom, we have two terms. So what I would say is the following. If numerator fraction, or I could actually just say if the numerator or denominator fraction is more than one term, simplify that one first. Simplify it first. So we're going to simplify this one. So how would you simplify that? Well, if I gave you this as its own question and I said, hey, simplify, well then what you should remember is that because there's a plus or a minus in between, you need to get a common denominator. So the common denominator here would be, the lowest common denominator there would just be 25x. So that means you'd have to multiply this one with x at the top and the bottom, and then this one you'd have to multiply with 25 at the top and the bottom. Okay, but I should technically be doing that over here. So let's quickly go do that. So it's going to become 4x over 25x, take away. Now what's 16 times 25? Quick. No, I'm just joking. I'm typing it on my calculator right now. What do you think we are? Robots here. So it's 400 over 25x. Okay, now because these denominators are the same, we can put them together. Just always remember your main fraction line. Just remember which one that is. Some students get a bit confused and they start doing this. And then suddenly you forget which one's the main fraction line. So make this one longer. And then this one is now going to be 25x. And so we're going to be left with 4x, take away 400. There we go. Now we have a fraction over a one-term fraction. And so now we can just stick to the normal keep, change, flip. Okay? Because this was two terms, but now we only have one term. So that's what you want. You want to have a one term over a one term. In one of the questions we're going to do in the next few seconds or minutes, there is going to be two terms at the top and two terms at the bottom. So that one's going to require some effort. And so what we now have is x over 25, and then we say divide by 4x, take away 400 over 25x. You don't always have to show this part where you write it like this. Your teacher might be okay with you just going times and then flipping this one immediately. I'm just breaking it into smaller steps. Okay, so this becomes a times, and then 25x at the top, 4x take away 400 over here. Now, if anything's the same at the top and the bottom, we can see this 25 is the same, so that can cancel out. You cannot cancel this and this because this is not part of one term. Okay, so when you've cancelled everything that you can, then you just put everything together. So at the top we have an x and another x, so that's just going to be x squared. Then at the bottom there's nothing we can do there, and so there is our answer. So here's our next example. So you see what I mean? So here's the main fraction line, and now here we have two terms, and here we have two terms. So you're going to have to go simplify the top and the bottom individually. Okay? So so you're not going to try to get the same denominator for all of it. You're going to look at this as its own little question, and then you're going to look at this as its own question for now. Okay, so with this one, what would the lowest common denominator be? Well, the lowest common denominator there would just be 5x squared. So that means you'd have to multiply this part by 5, top, or bottom and top, and then this one you'd have to multiply with x squared, bottom and top. Okay, then with this one, the lowest common denominator, okay, I just wrote that in a different color. So with this one, the lowest common denominator would just be 2x squared. And so we would multiply this by 2, and this by x squared. Whoops, and at the top by 2, and this one by x squared. Okay, so we end up with 125 over 5x squared for this part. Take away x to the power of 4 over 5x squared. And then at the bottom fraction, you'd end up with 10 over 2x squared. Take away x3 over 2x squared. You see, these denominators are different, but that is okay. So what we now have to do is just put this all together, and then we're going to put all of this together. So that's going to become 125 take away x to the 4 over 5x squared divided by 10 take away x cubed over 2x squared. Let me write this somewhere else. So what's nice about this now is you have one term at the top, one term at the bottom. That's what you want. Now you can use your keep, change, flip. I was going to say KCF. So you keep the top fraction as it is. I'm going to go in one step now. You change this to a multiply, and then you flip this one upside down. So the 2x squared is at the top, and the 10 minus x3 is at the bottom. So now we can cancel diagonally. These two parts are exactly the same. And then there's not really much else we can do. So now what we do is we multiply the tops together. I mean, there's no more cancelling we can do. So we multiply the tops together. So that's going to become 250 take away 2x4. And then at the bottom, we'd be left with 50 take away 5x cubed. And then once again, you cannot cancel that, for example, because this is not one term and this is not one term. We have two more examples that we're going to do. So including this one and then one other one. Okay, so there's the main fraction line, you see? Now if you look at the top, that's two terms, so we have to simplify that. And that's two terms, so we have to simplify that. So for this top one, your lowest common denominator will just be 4 and then x take away 5. So that means that this part is going to be multiplied by x take away 5, and so is this part over here. This part is going to be multiplied with a 4, so we can multiply that by 4, top and bottom. And then for this fraction down at the bottom, the common denominator will just be those two. So your lowest common denominator, or let's write that a little bit further away, will just be x plus 4 and then x take away 5. So that means we're going to multiply this one with x take away 5, top and bottom. And then this one is going to be multiplied with x add 4, top and bottom, or bottom and top. Okay, so there we have it. So we're just going to go simplify that now, or just put that all together. So for this first fraction, the common denominator is going to be 4 and then x take away 5. And then this part is going to become x squared take away 5x, because I'm multiplying those two together. And then this part here will just become 64. 16 times 4 is 64. Then at the bottom, so make a longer line, just so you can remind yourself which fraction is which. The denominator will just be x take away 5. Don't multiply the denominators out. We can maybe do it at the very end, but not at this step, because things might cancel. You see how these two are probably going to cancel later on. So don't worry about that right now. And then I'm going to multiply this out. So that's going to become 16x, take away 80. And then I'm going to multiply these two brackets together using FOIL, okay? So you can do the FOIL method, but what you should get is x squared plus 8x plus 16. And let's just remember that this is the longer fraction over here. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just simplify this part. So for example, the 80 and the 16, we're going to put that together, and we're also going to put the 16x and the 8x together. So that'll eventually give us x squared, and then 16x plus 8x is 24x, and then minus 80, or negative 80 plus 16 is negative 64, and then at the bottom we just leave it as it is. So now what's good is we have, or what's nice is we have like a single term over a single term. So now we can use the keep change flip. So we write out the first fraction exactly as it is. We change the next one to a multiply, and then we flip it over. So it's going to be x take away 5, x add 4, and then at the bottom we have x squared plus 24x take away 64. Now, if you watched the lessons where I showed you how to simplify, or when you're multiplying fractions together, then we said that each of these parts must be as factorized as possible. So these parts here and here, they are factorized. But this part and this part, they might be able to factorize a little bit further. Okay, so I spent a bit of time trying to factorize this one. It does not factorize. And then this one doesn't factorize nicely either. The way that you can check is, if you really cannot find the factors, then you can use the quadratic formula and just see if you get any answers. If you get nice answers, then it can factorize, and if you don't, then it just doesn't factorize. Okay, so we stuck with those. So then what happens is we just look for things that are the same at the top and bottom. So this x minus 5 and this x minus 5 can cancel. And so at the top, we are going to be left with x squared take away 5x add 64. And that is all multiplied with x add 4. Then at the bottom, we're left with 4, and then x squared add 24x minus 64. Now we're going to go multiply all of this out together. So at the top, you're going to take this x squared, and you're going to multiply it to the x and to the 4. So that would become x cubed add 4x squared. Then you're going to take the negative 5x, and you're going to multiply it there and there. So that would be negative 5x squared, negative 20x. and then you're going to take the 64 and you're going to multiply it there and there. So that's going to become 64x, add, what's that, 200, and then at the bottom, you're just going to multiply that into the 4 into the bracket, so 4x squared, add 24, 48, 96x, take away, what's that, 336. Oh no, geez, that's embarrassing. 256. Okay. Now, the bottom you can't really do anything, but this we could still simplify a little bit further. So for example, we could put the 4 and the 5x squares together and the 20 and the 64x together. Okay, so let me make some space. So that would eventually give us x3, whoops. Now this 4 take away 5 is negative 1. And then negative 20 plus 64 is 44. Okay, and then at the bottom, we can't really do anything there, so we'll just leave that as it is. And that's it. Now you can't cancel those because it's not part of one term and one term. So here's our last example. So here we have one term at the top. This is our longer line. And then here we have two terms. So here we're gonna have to simplify that a little bit first. All right, so we'll leave the top exactly as it is. Now at the bottom, you could think of this as 1 over 1. So the lowest common denominator is going to be x. So that means we'd have to multiply this one by x at the bottom and this one by x at the top. And so that's going to give us x over x plus 3 over x. And then we can just put that all together because the denominators are the same. And so that's going to become x add 3 over x. Now we have one term, whoopsie, over one term. So we can now say 2 over x add 3, multiply, and then we can flip this one upside down. So x goes at the top, and then x add 3 goes at the bottom. And so there's nothing that's the same at the top and bottom. So what that means is we then multiply tops and tops together. So 2x, and then at the bottom you're just going to get x plus 3. But there will be 2 of those, so x plus 3 to the power of 2. So your teacher might even expect you to write that as x plus 3 and another x plus 3, and then they might even want you to multiply that out. You know, it's different at each school or with each teacher. So all of it's correct. So if we had to FOIL that out, it would eventually give you x squared plus 6x plus 9 after you've FOILed out and simplified.